In 1930, the St Kilda archipelago was finally abandoned to wildlife after centuries of human habitation. The main island of St Kilda, Hirta, housed most of the population of around 180 residents in the late 17th century, falling to 90 in the census of 15th June 1764, rising to 112 in 1851. By 1928, this had diminished to just 45, and by the summer of 1930, only 36 residents lived on Hirta. These included ancestors of 5 families recorded in the 18th century census: the McQueens, Fergusons, MacDonalds, McKinnons and Gillies.
Ferguson is a very popular name on the island. I had so many friends with that name, the last name Ferguson on there. We do have a Scottish, a little bit of a Scottish presence on the island. They came around the same time as the Irish did, I do believe. They came to the island. There's a lot of, there's a place called Montmorris where a lot of the Irish and the Scottish settled. And there's a lot of people up there with red hair who were ancestors of the Scottish people that were there. They had red hair, but they tanned, and they had freckles and things. Here's a funny story about those people. I don't know if they were trying to follow the general image of these people, but man, they used to come down in the town, boy, because Montmorris is out in the countryside. Whenever they had a festival and thing downtown, you have to look out for them Montmorris people, because they're coming down to throw down. They drunk and they're ready to fight. And we call them Mongs. Montmorris, Mongs is what we call them. But oh my goodness, I'm watching these things and it's just bringing back memories to me of the island and stuff. I just watched one on Romania. Check it out. Yeah, the Fergusons. See, in my head, I'm going to and I'm seeing the Fergusons that used to live on the island. That is crazy. One of my mom's friends was a Ferguson. Let's keep going here.
Life was proving increasingly difficult, so they decided to do something about it. The island of Hirta measures roughly 3 miles by 2 miles, with only one easily accessible landing place, and for 8 months of the year, the islanders were cut off from the mainland due to the rough seas. Their only livestock were a small number of black-faced sheep, which ate what little vegetation there was. Food was scarce, so the islanders took to killing wildfowl and seabirds and eating their eggs, their main source of food in 1930.
Okay, I just saw something really strange there.
Which ate what little vegetation there was.
Right there, is that somebody
Food was scarce, so the islanders took to killing wildfowl and seabirds and eating their eggs.
That looked like somebody swimming there. That looked like somebody swimming there, didn't it?
Main source of food in 1930. The men, who were expert at climbing on the rocky precipices, divided the cliff into sections, and this was allocated to each man. Once the gathering of the birds was completed, the birds were divided equally among them. A native breed of collie dog was used to catch puffins, while the cats on the island killed the mice, although there were never any rats on the island. The first visitors to Hirta are thought to have been Bronze Age hunter-gatherers looking for seals, fish and seabirds, and was first referred to in early records as Hirt, Hirta, Hirth and Hythra, all of which came from the Gaelic, meaning West Country. It's also surmised that it could have derived from the Old Norse skildr, meaning shield, as the island resembles a shield from a distance. In the 14th century, the island is mentioned in a charter in which John MacDonald, Lord of the Isles, formally handed over the property to his son, Ranald. Robert II, in another charter, confirmed this legally. The island then passed to the MacDonalds of Sleat, then to the MacLeods of Dunvegan. In 1779, the island went up for sale again, but in 1871 the MacLeods bought it back for £3,000, having regretted its sale in the 18th century. In the 17th century, although the island was small, it boasted 3 churches, all of which seem to have been fairly substantial and well equipped. In 1697, the population stood at 180, and Magnus Martin wrote that they were remarkable for their beauty and virtue, and that their condition was that which the people in the Golden Age is fain to be.
That's crazy. There's a lot of Martins on the island where I'm from too. One of my best friends actually was John Martin. He's actually an author, right? He wrote a couple of books and stuff here recently. I haven't seen him, good Lord, in decades. But that's a very popular last name on the island, Martin.
By the poets. They were free from solicitous cares, from envy, deceit, and dissimulation, from ambition and pride, and the consequences that attend them. He also said there were 30 horses on the island, but these were later shipped to the mainland by the laird, who thought they damaged the grass too much. At the same time, Highland cattle were bred on the island, but again the laird had the calves shipped to the mainland. Although the island is surrounded by the sea, the St Kildans didn't eat fish, as they thought it made their skin break out, and during the 19th century, cultivation of the land dropped by around half. In 1800, there were 2,000 sheep on the St Kilda archipelago, but by the 1920s, there were only just enough to provide the inhabitants with mutton and wool, with the wool being plucked rather than shorn from the sheep and made into blankets. The women did the spinning and dyeing of the wool, while the men did the weaving and tailoring. The 1921 census was drawn up by the Registrar General for Scotland, Dr. James Crawford Dunlop, who travelled to the island on HMS Mistley and recorded 73 people living on the island. It had been 74, but 65-year-old Marion McQueen, wife of Donald McQueen, died before Census Day, 19th June. The island had been hit by a whooping cough outbreak that year, thought to have been brought to the island by 2 tourists, affecting half the islanders. And the seabird season was badly affected by stormy weather. On 10th May 1930, the islanders, through Dugald Munro, the resident missionary and schoolteacher, petitioned the Labour government's Secretary of State for Scotland, William Adamson MP.
That's another name I haven't heard in years, Monroe. There's a lot of people with that last name on the island, or at least a couple of families. Wow. I'm being all nostalgic today.
To help them be removed from the island and relocated to the mainland, and for the men to have jobs to go to. At the time, the only village on the island consisted of a church, a manse, the factor's house, a store, and just over 10 cottages, some of which had zinc roofs, while others were thatched. Each stood around 20 yards apart and formed a crescent shape around the bay. There was also a resident nurse, Williamina Barclay, who persuaded the islanders to move to the mainland. This was brought home by the death of 2 women that year. On 26 May, 35-year-old Mary Gillies of 10 Main Street died in Glasgow following complications during childbirth. Her baby Annie also died. Another Mary Gillies, aged 22, died at 14 Main Street of tuberculosis. Living on the island was always a hard way of life, even with the coming of wireless communication, which didn't make a whole deal of difference to them. A supply ship landed once a year, but this wasn't enough to sustain them. Tetanus was another factor in their decision to leave, as it had ravaged the island for nearly 100 years.
Wow.
But also help during emergencies was 110 miles away at least.
Tetanus is something you don't hear much about. When I was growing up, that was a major concern on the island. Tetanus. I don't think I've ever heard an American say the word tetanus since I got here.
On Friday, 29th August 1930, household effects and livestock were boarded onto the steamer Donara Castle, with the fisheries cruiser HMS Harebell assisting. 573 sheep were transported out to the waiting ship on small boats, while the 13 cattle swam out. These were all sold, and eventually their owners were paid. All the records for the islands were removed by the registrar for the Northern District. Then the Donara Castle set sail for Oban. The islanders boarded Harebell and watched as their former home drifted out of sight.
That must have been hard.
They landed in the district of Lochaline on the mainland and were allocated new homes, meaning that for the first time they would be able to pour water from a tap. The owner of the island, Reginald MacLeod, backed the islanders who wanted to leave, but he wanted no part in it for fear of being labelled as the man who cleared it. He also thought it unlikely anyone would ever live there on a permanent basis again. The islanders, meanwhile, were resigned to their fate, but not enthusiastic about the move, with most of them knowing nothing about the mainland or its modern way of life. According to Monroe, every family was offered a house, a piece of land for either grazing or agriculture, and the men were guaranteed work with the Forestry Commission for 153 days a year. However, since childhood, all they had known was crag work, so would have to learn new skills. Even their weaving had been done on ancient hand looms, and the women only knew spinning. Most settled in Morvern in Argyll, with some going to Stromeferry in Rossshire, Inverness-shire, and a few to Curras in Fife. While in Argyll, the men also repaired roads and fences, and it's recorded that one family, the McKinnons, brought in a weekly wage of between £6 and £7, much more than the £30 a year they eked out on the island, although they had to pay rent, buy food and clothing, and pay for heating and transport. They had been one of the families worst affected in 1929, when they nearly starved to death in the winter of that year, and were instrumental in St Kilda being evacuated for that very reason. However, tragedy struck the family anyway, with 4 of their children dying of tuberculosis in 1936.
You know, that's understandable because if you live on an island, there's like 180 of you isolated there. Not much people go there. So then there wouldn't be a breakout of diseases there really unless people from the outside world come in and bring it there. And of course, they said that's what happened there with the whooping cough is what they say and stuff like that. But that's crazy, you know what I mean? It's kind of like Me going to Southeast Asia on that island where those that tribe is and nobody goes there and people are barred from going there because they're going to bring diseases in there that these people don't know and they're probably going to die. They probably wouldn't accept modern medicine. They probably did because they did move to the mainland, but that's crazy. But yeah, that's understandable too, though.
Many of the older women never adapted to mainland life and died soon after moving to Argyll. Other women found themselves isolated from the women they'd grown up with and knew intimately. Some of the belongings of the Hirta folk were sold, as they only left with what they could carry, as well as the church's baptismal font. John Crichton Stewart, the Earl of Dumfries, and later 4th Marquess of Bute, bought St Kilda after its evacuation as a bird sanctuary, and every summer some St Kildans were allowed to return to Hirta, a pilgrimage to what was their home, but mainly to maintain the old manse and factor's house for the Marquess. However, with the outbreak of World War II, these visits were stopped and were never resumed. In 1932, it was restocked with Soay sheep, which still live on the island. In November 1987, the last person to be born on St Kilda, Neil McKinnon, died at Fortrose on the Black Isle. He was 3 when his family were evacuated. In April 2016, Rachel Johnson, born Gillies, died aged 93 and was the last surviving native St Kildan. The most famous inhabitant of St Kilda was Rachel Cheesley, Lady Grange, wife of James Erskine, Lord Grange, advocate, judge and politician. After 25 years of marriage and 9 children, the couple split acrimoniously, with her claiming her husband plotted against the Hanoverian government. Furious at the accusation, Erskine had his wife kidnapped in January 1732 from her home in Nidries Wynd in Edinburgh. Following her incarceration in various places in the West, she ended up on St Kilda in the summer of 1734, where she stayed until 1740. She died on 12 May 1745 on Skye, aged 66. The story of St Kilda, or Hirta, is one of survival in the face of ever-increasing adversity. The evacuation was a necessity, but today, the islands, owned by the National Trust for Scotland since 1957, welcomes tourists and wildlife enthusiasts during the summer season who can see a myriad of seabirds, including puffins, fulmars and gannets, and reflect on what has been. A military presence has been on Hirta since 1957, although today is mainly civilian, and they stay there all year round. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of only 39 in the world, and the first in Scotland, having been granted the status in 1986. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment.
Wow, that is crazy. They had to evacuate a whole group of people and thing, you know what I mean? I hope you guys enjoyed this, man. I enjoyed learning about this. This just shows how tribes and clans and all of that disappear with time. You know what I mean? The last surviving member, 93 years old, died. There's nobody who was actually born and raised on that island from that point. Anyway, man, I'll leave a link in the description to this video. Go check it out if you want to without me stopping and babbling. Also, if you like what I react to, drop a like on the video. Subscribe, hit the notification button, alright? And I'll also leave links in here to that side of videos I've reacted to on Scotland's history and culture and food and stuff like that. Go check it out. Enjoy it, man. In the meantime, y'all take care of each other, alright? Cool runnings.